And there are places on this earth that should never be traveled, roads that lead not to destinations, but to fates. Places where the walls of the world grow thin, and things older than time stir beneath the frost. She sits alone, wrapped in the stolen warmth of another's coat, her fingers tightening around a purse not her own. Outside, the snow is endless, formless, without roads or signs or any marker of civilization, as though the world beyond the windows no longer exists. She dares not sleep. Sleep invites the cold. Sleep invites the thoughts. And the thoughts remind her of what she has done. She isn't alone. At the far end of the car, standing like a statue of some forgotten deity, is the conductor. He does not move. He does not call for tickets. He merely waits, his figure draped in a coat, too thick for mere winter. His hood pulled too low for mere shadow. Something about him unsettles her, though she cannot say why. There is an absence where his presence should be. A void that drinks the light, swallows the space around him. He is not just a man standing in the train car. He is something else, something waiting. She looks away, pretending not to notice. The train should not be stopping. Outside the doors lies a station that defies time. Walls carved from blackened stone, their surfaces slick with frost, steps leading into nowhere. There are no signs, no waiting passengers, no warmth, no welcome. And then she sees them. Figures, half buried in the snowdrifts, half seen through the swirling storm. They stand in eerie silence, their bodies rigid, their faces, if they have them, turned toward the open door, waiting. More than a dozen, more than she can count, and yet somehow she knows they are all here for her. She expects the doors to close, the train to pull away from this godforsaken place, but it does not, because the conductor moves. His gloved hand reaches for a lever, slow, unhurried, as if fulfilling a duty that was decided long before she ever stepped aboard. And with a single, effortless pull, he lets them in. The doors slide open, and the dead do not hesitate. They do not shamble or stagger as stories tell of the undead. They run, a tide of frozen flesh and gnashing teeth, their moans twisting into the storm. And they do not touch him. The conductor, they do not see him. They are here for her. They are too many. They fill the car, the seats, the aisles, pressing in from all sides. She slashes, cuts. One stumbles, but another takes its place. A wave, a tide, a certainty. Hands tear at her coat. Claws scrape against her throat. Her blood smears across the frozen windows. And still, they come. The emergency exit, her last chance, is just within reach. The door should lead to another car, to safety. But there is no platform, no bridge, only darkness, only an abyss that stretches beyond sight. She fights. Too many hands, too many teeth, just too many. The frozen horde lunges. She tries to hang on with one arm. A piercing bite of pain inflames her brain. She loses balance and falls. This was never a train. This was a judgment. There are men in this world whose appetites are matched only by their callousness, whose greed is an abyss that can never be filled. Such was the nature of Gerald Jerry Marks, an architect of industry, a master of deception, and above all, a merchant of tainted sustenance. His empire of filth bore the name Nuritech Foods, a name that promised nourishment, yet delivered only corruption. A sinister masquerade of progress, built on the ruined health of the innocent. It was not enough for him to profit. He sought to devour. And so, he devised a most insidious cost-saving measure, the incorporation of writhing, blind, subterranean vermin into the food he peddled, ground into indistinction, disguised with chemical artifice. Their corrupted essence became the flesh of school meals, the marrow of market shelves. The people would never know. He was certain of it. The factory workers, those wretched souls bound by necessity, spoke of an unholy miasma that clung to the air like a specter of decay. But Marx, ever the callous man of industry, dismissed such concerns. The ledger knew no morality, only balance. And so, when the first whispers of affliction arose, when children, fragile as porcelain dolls, grew ill, their stomachs swollen with unknown horrors, Marx responded as he always had, with silence, with lawyers, with the crushing force of money. He was untouchable, or so he believed. In the great and hallowed silence of the witching hour, when all men of decency rest beneath the weight of their dreams, Jerry Marks awoke to an itch. It was a trifling thing at first, a faint stirring upon the flesh of his scalp. No doubt the lingering touch of some forgotten nightmare. But as his fingers sought to quell the irritation, he recoiled in sudden revulsion. Something moved beneath his skin. He bolted upright, the air thick with the acrid scent of rotting grain and damp earth. His breath caught in his throat as he heard it, that faint, rustling chitter, like the scurrying of countless insectile limbs. The sound was above him. His gaze lifted to the ceiling, and his mind, trained in deception, fortified by greed, could not comprehend what his eyes beheld. The plaster bulged, pulsated, a grotesque tumor swelling from the rafters. Then, with a sound like the rending of old flesh, it ruptured. A tide of black, wriggling bodies poured forth, cascading in an unspeakable deluge, their glistening forms writhing, undulating, a monstrous, insatiable hunger made manifest. The worms, those very creatures he had woven into the fabric of his deceit, now rained upon him in an unholy baptism of judgment. His screams, muffled by the ceaseless tide of blind, gnawing mouths, echoed through the hollow corridors of his mansion. He flailed, convulsing beneath the weight of his tormentors, as they forced themselves into every crevice. Ears, nostrils, mouth, eyes. They knew him. He stumbled, convulsing, his veins writhing like a nest disturbed, his stomach distended, as if some unseen force battled within his bowels. His own flesh, once plump and sallow, now twitched and buckled, as if something within sought to break free. His hands, once the architects of deception, became his undoing. They clawed at his own skin, raking deep trenches through his cheeks, his throat, his chest, until they found movement within. His stomach swelled, stretched, the skin growing tight and translucent. The pressure was unbearable. Then it split, and they came. In an eruption of gore and filth, they poured forth from his own flesh. The worms, the very ones he had once deemed nothing more than protein, now feasted upon their creator. He fell to the ground, his form shriveling, hollowing, deflating like some grotesque husk abandoned by its host. His eyes, now glassy and vacant, beheld the mirror across the room, and in that wretched reflection, he saw not himself. Remember, something else stared back, a great churning mass of eyeless hunger, countless forms entangled, knowing, insatiable. And within its unholy depths, he heard his own voice, still rasping, still muttering the words of a fool who thought himself above consequence.
Protein is protein.
The Gulf of America was calm that night. Too calm, as though the ocean itself had stilled in anticipation. The only sound was the occasional slap of water against the hull, a whisper in the dark, speaking in a tongue I did not wish to understand. I stood alone on the deck, breathing in the salt, heavy air, my hands still slick with sweat, my heart hammering its panicked rhythm. At my feet lay the captain, motionless, his face frozen in that final moment of shock and fury. I had not meant to kill him, not at first. A quarrel over money, over respect, over 1,000 grievances that had built like barnacles on the hull of my mind. A shove, a moment of blind rage, the dull crack of his skull against the iron rail, and then silence. There was no turning back. I heaved his lifeless body overboard, watching as the dark water closed over him, accepting him without hesitation. There was no struggle, no final gasp, just the quiet gulp of the sea, as though it had been waiting for him all along. I exhaled, steadying myself. The deed was done. The ocean had taken him, and that should have been the end of it. But the night had other plans. I wiped my hands on my shirt and turned toward the console. The sooner I put this vessel in motion, the sooner I could fabricate a story. A sudden accident, a man lost to the current, a tragedy no one could have prevented. I turned the key. The engine did not respond. I tried again, more forcefully. Nothing. Just the hollow, mechanical click of a starter that refused to engage. Impossible. The boat had been running smoothly all day. Fuel was full. No electrical failures. Nothing that should have stopped it dead like this. I checked the wires, the fuses, the fuel lines. Everything was as it should have been. And yet, the boat would not move. A breeze should have carried me, at least set me adrift. But the water was unnaturally still. I was no longer simply floating. I was held. The air grew thick with a damp, cloying heat, pressing against my skin like a second, unwelcome presence. And then, the fog. It did not creep in, as mist does in the early morning. It fell. A great wall of white, swallowing the horizon, smothering the stars, reducing the world to a dim, suffocating blur. My fingers tightened around the wheel, though I had no control now. The radio flickered to life with a burst of static. A voice, faint, garbled, indecipherable, echoed through the empty cabin. I pressed the receiver to my ear. The voice became clearer. Not a distress signal, not a warning. It was my own voice. Repeating the excuse I had planned to tell the authorities, word for word, I dropped the receiver, bile rising in my throat. That was when I saw it. A glow appeared in the mist. Not the warm, golden light of another ship, but a sickly, blue-white radiance. A vessel loomed ahead, drifting through the fog, slow and deliberate. Its silhouette was unmistakable. It was my boat. The same name painted on the side. The same building. But I changed, ruined. Its wood swollen and rotting, its rails lined with thick, barnacle-crusted growths. Water poured from its deck, as though it had been pulled from the depths moments ago. I felt something rising in my chest. Dread, panic, a terrible certainty that whoever was piloting that ship was watching me. Then, the figure appeared. Standing at the helm, motionless, his dripping clothes hanging from his frame like a burial shroud. The captain. I staggered back, gripping the rail. This was a hallucination, a trick of the mind, a nightmare given form. But the longer I stared, the harder it was to deny. The man before me, the man I had killed, was real. His face was the same, but his skin had taken on the pallor of something that had spent too long beneath the waves. His eyes, though, they were wrong, glowing like the fiery embers of hell. He stepped forward, his boots slapping wetly against the deck. I watched, transfixed, as he raised a hand, not in accusation, not in anger, but in silent command. And beneath my feet, the boat began to sink. The water rose swiftly, sloshing over my boots, pulling at my legs with an unnatural force. I fought against it, scrambling for the radio, the emergency flares, but I already knew the truth. There was no escape. The boat was going down, pulled by an unseen weight, dragged into the black, bottomless abyss below. The captain stood unmoving, watching me with that same dreadful calm. The dark water licking at his waist, his chest, his throat, until he was gone. And then, so was I. Morning came, and the gulf lay still, its surface betraying nothing of the night before. The boat drifted into the dock, silent and unhurried, as if guided by an unseen hand. It moved too smooth, too steady, as if it belonged to the water now. The captain stepped off. His boots touched the dock, dry as bone. A few men muttered, exchanging uneasy glances. A boat that returns without its crew is a cursed thing. One old fisherman turned his head and spat into the sea, whispering a prayer under his breath. Someone finally spoke. "Where's your deckhand?"